Hi guys, what's up? It's me, Thomas. Today we're back here with Extra History, and today, well, we're here with Extra History Complete. So this is basically compiling all the videos into one major video. Today's one of the shorter ones. It's the Siege of Vienna. So, yeah, basically the Ottomans laid siege to Vienna, and we're about to see the aftermath, or at least what happened. So, I think I actually remember this one. I think they actually made this series 3-parters, because there was like this guy back in New Zealand who referenced it a lot, and, well, let's just say they wanted to combat the bad with the good, and, well, just check out the original. I'm not sure they'll bring it up here, but if they do, you know the one. Anyway, let's just check out the siege. Be sure to like, subscribe for more. Hope you enjoy. Here we go.
July 7th, 1683. Emperor Leopold heard Mass that morning, continuing his normal schedule as if enemy troops were not loose in his country. The head of the Holy Roman Empire and defender of the faith may have been bookish, but he was also
that's been rolled over. Plus,
a courier arrives. News from the field.
Uh-oh.
The Turks have broken out, dust from their march rising in great columns. Tartar horsemen are ravaging the only troops blocking the advance. An Ottoman army is headed for Vienna. Leopold can't stay. His sons are both below the age of 5, his wife pregnant, and his closest heir, the King of Spain, lies on his deathbed.
16 more years.
The sensible decision to run. So that evening,
really
a convoy of fine carriages pulls out of Vienna. Over 100,000 Ottoman troops are heading for the city, but only 15,000 men defend its walls.
Only 10 to 1.
They have only 6 days to prepare. How long can they hold? This Extra History Complete is brought to you by Nebula, where you could be watching this and thousands of other awesome videos and original content, all ad-free.
Yep. Here we go. The opening bombardment.
But this siege began as an idea in Istanbul over a year before. Though a quick note, while the official name of the Ottoman capital at this time was Constantinople, the name Istanbul was already being used for the city, even in some civic office titles. So we've used it because it's more familiar to modern audiences.
Fair.
Mehmed IV was a student of history. Like Leopold, he loved nothing more than spending his days in the palace library, poring over accounts and records of the empire. It helped him understand his country's history and where he stood in it. He'd read how in 1453, his predecessor, Mehmed II, had conquered Constantinople, the great city of Istanbul where he now ruled. When his ancestors did that, they had become the inheritors of the Roman Empire by right of conquest. Among his other titles, Mehmed was Caesar of Rome. But a year before that conquest, an Austrian duke of the Habsburg line rallied enough support from the elector counts to get crowned as Holy Roman Emperor. There couldn't be 2 heirs of Rome, and to the Ottomans, these German kings were pretenders. Mehmed knew that since then, the Ottomans and the Habsburgs had battled for supremacy, expanding towards each other as the Kingdom of Hungary, which separated them, fell apart. Now that land was a mixed frontier of Ottoman and Habsburg forts, as much Western Asia as it was Eastern Europe. Mehmed read how his predecessors had made great gains there, and he had too. Indeed, the empire was at its greatest extent ever. In 1529, his ancestor Suleiman had even besieged the Habsburg capital of Vienna, and he would have taken it too, if not for an early winter. And though he...
Man, you gotta think about how far you can go before it's just like, cold. You know it's true, but jeez, I feel bad from Suleiman there. Like, he tried, but, goes to show you, Mother Nature ain't gonna allow it. Anyway.
He had been a good custodian of the state. Mehmed knew his accomplishments didn't measure up to those storied ancestors. To truly live in history, he would have to do more than take further bites out of Ukraine. But Mehmed's Grand Vizier, Kara Mustafa Pasha, had an audacious plan. He too had something to prove. His family had served as viziers to the Ottoman sultans for a quarter century, and had helped the empire reach its current height. But Kara Mustafa was also adopted, and perhaps felt a need to prove himself worthy of his family legacy.
Fair enough.
So, he proposed that they outdo
You'll see those stickers every now and again.
The great Mehmed II had plucked the red apple of Constantinople, but they would finally pick the golden apple, the place that had evaded even the Sultan's illustrious ancestors, Vienna. It was a...
Actually, it's pretty bold. I mean, with that opening, they would be able to charge more of, like, Europe in a way. since, you know, Ukraine is technically in Europe, but not by much, and you think of it like that. Anyway.
A bold plan. One that would humiliate the Habsburgs, seize their trade routes, and create a bastion to secure their territory in the Balkans, Hungary, and Ukraine. And though it was true that the city was a long way off, at the farthest limits of the empire's striking distance, the prospect wasn't ludicrous. In fact, 1682 was the best time in a century to take Vienna. See, for the last 2 decades, the empires had been at peace, and Leopold had used that period of calm to refocus his military on guarding his western borders from French encroachment. The eastern sector was neglected, and Ottoman spies reported that more modern earthworks around Vienna crumbled from inattention. The city's stone wall was still medieval, its blocks held together by gravity rather than mortar, meaning the city's defense was akin to sort of a giant Jenga tower. Ottoman artillery only had to knock some blocks out, and the whole thing would come tumbling down. Heck, it sounds like Zoe could do that job if she was bored enough. Sorry, back to it. In addition, the deeply Catholic Habsburgs' brutal oppression of Protestants had unsettled their rule in Hungary. The Ottomans had long experience backing Protestant unrest, and some on the frontier even considered the Muslim Empire a more tolerant ruler than the Catholic Habsburgs.
Yeah, there's a lot of anti-Semitism running around back
would rally to their aid. So in January of 1682, Kara Mustafa formally declared war on the Holy Roman Empire. Austrian diplomats watched as 2 janissaries planted horsehair standards outside the palace in Istanbul. It was an old tradition, one that recalled the Ottomans' origins as nomadic horse tribesmen migrating out of Central Asia. Because while Islamic, the Ottoman Turks had retained their distinct culture. And for centuries, this gesture meant to prepare for war. But in Vienna, Leopold and his ministers dismissed these reports. The real threat, they reasoned, was France. The Ottomans were planning some kind of frontier incursion, probably to take a few forts, or at most, cutting north to hit the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Meanwhile, the Ottoman army
you're gonna regret that.
The corps came first. Elite horseback archers, levies from North Africa, Arabia, Egypt, and Anatolia. Huge artillery pieces, a baggage train of camels, siege engineers, adept at tunneling below enemy walls and bringing them down with gunpowder charges. And the famous janissaries. Elite assault troops drilled with swords and heavy-bore muskets, each carrying a bag of grenades, spheres of glass or clay encasing handfuls of powder. Once, long ago, janissaries had been Christian children taken as a tithe, converted, and indoctrinated as soldiers. But now, they were a privileged class, and families jockeyed to place their sons in their ranks. Each unit was a sworn brotherhood. Every man marked with a tattoo giving his serial number and unit designation. As the army marched out of the capital, the janissaries' supreme commander, the man whose tattoo was a simple number 1, traveled with them. The Sultan himself. Now, in the European imagination, Ottoman soldiers were a savage horde. But in truth, this army was organized down to the smallest detail. Every squad had a sleeping tent and a cooking pot. They had mobile latrine tents, enough food to sustain them for the whole campaign, and even designated cobblers. In fact, Ottoman military planners had calculated how long a janissary could march before his shoes would need new soles. Talk about crossing I's and dotting T's. Both of which are not in the word shoes. Let's move on.
You know what I mean.
As they moved into the frontier, Protestant levies joined them, their numbers swelling to 140,000. But when they reached Belgrade, the Sultan handed command to his Grand Vizier and turned back. Ceremonial deniability. If Kara Mustafa succeeded, the Sultan would take credit. But if he failed, the blame would be his alone. And it was only then, at the end of March 1683, that the Grand Vizier informed his officers of their target and sent a final declaration of war to Vienna. When the message arrived, Leopold realized he'd lost time dismissing the Ottoman threat. He dispatched diplomats to Jan III Sobieski, the King of Poland and the Grand Duke of Lithuania, proposing a mutual defense pact. The 54-year-old king, elected to the throne on the strength of his military record, readily agreed. Should the Turks attack Krakow, Vienna would send aid. And, you know, vice versa, not that they would ever dare. Still thinking Poland was the target, the emperor appointed his brother-in-law, Charles, Duke of Lorraine, as head of his army. Though an aristocrat, Charles was an experienced military officer, but also an eccentric one. He dressed in high fashion, but let his clothes wear out until they were stained and torn. His wig literally rotted off his head, but he was also infamously durable. In his career, he'd survived head wounds, smallpox, and a nosedive off a bridge.
Why did he
To command Vienna's garrison, Leopold picked Count Ernst von Stachenberg, a man with an unremarkable military record, but a steely disposition that might come in handy. Yet the most important defender was not a duke or count, but a fabulously expensive mercenary. George Rimpler was a German military engineer who'd written a treatise on fort design. He'd also faced the Ottomans before and knew their siege capabilities. For months, Rimpler worked day and night to modernize Vienna's crumbling outer earthworks, ditches, and revlins. Triangular platforms meant to funnel attackers into kill zones. Rimpler sunk pointed stakes into the earthworks to create fences and fighting platforms. And though simple, when wrecked by cannonballs or mines, these wooden palisades turned into debris fields that slowed or halted attacking infantry. Stone, by contrast, collapsed into easily scalable piles. And then came July 7th. The day, too late, far too late, that Leopold realized Vienna was the target. Panic gripped the district. The city's nobles fled along with the emperor. 60,000 of the city's wealthy took to the road, replaced by refugees from the countryside. Rimpler and Stachenberg madly tried to finish the defenses, torching the city's outskirts to clear a field of fire. Charles took the army into a blocking position, but he'd underestimated the Ottoman speed. By the time he deployed, the dust plumes of enemy cavalry were already behind him. He fought his way clear and sent the infantry to bolster the city's defenses, spiriting his cavalry into the woods, hoping to keep Vienna's supply lines open. And on July 14th, the Ottomans arrived at Vienna. 2 days later, cavalry stormed the smoking outskirts of the city, throwing back the defenders and securing a base of operations, a place for Kara Mustafa to draw up his artillery. On the walls, Vienna defenders saw smoke jet from the line of cannons. Pencil lines appeared in the sky, the arc of incoming cannon fire. Then behind them, the crack of lead on stone. Broken glass coughed outward. A church steeple crumbled. Then another.
And
any high tower, any house that poked above the earth fortifications became a target. Vienna was burning, and there was nothing to do but hold.
Hold firm. Good luck. Next up, Tunnel Wars. Basically the...
July 25th, Vienna. The Ottoman engineers work in the dark, chipping away at the stony soil with pickaxes and judging distance with twine. 20 feet above, at surface level, other engineers are creating trench works, throwing boards on top for a roof, and heaping them with earth so that the soldiers can approach the enemy defenses under cover. They're also setting up sandbag positions for the artillery. But down here, there's only cold earth and the toneless music of tools on stone. When the men emerge to rest, the sun makes them squint. Finally, their officer measures the distance and nods. Directly beneath the enemy. The men pile bags of gunpowder at the end of a tunnel and lay a long fuse. An engineer then touches a candle to the fuse, blows on it, and waits patiently. Once it glows, he begins to run. The first day of the siege, Vienna panicked. A teenage boy dressed in women's clothing, possibly an actor or a saboteur in disguise, threw burning wood and straw into the city's arsenal. The door of the powder storage caught fire, though soldiers extinguished it before the whole arsenal went up. The arsonist barely made it around the block before a crowd of citizens tore him apart with their bare hands. The mob was so consumed with fear, they didn't even consider his value as a prisoner. They'd heard what happened in fortress towns outside Vienna. When they resisted, Ottoman troops had beheaded the leading citizens and pressed the rest into slavery. Vienna had...
Yeesh. Yeah, you think... If I saw that, I'd be like, oh, god damn it, you idiots, we could have used them. You could have known what the Turks were up to. God damn it. I mean, I can imagine just, like, someone in charge just coming up on the scene, be like, just seeing this, just like, god damn it, you idiots. Anyway.
Had received the same offer from Kara Mustafa. Surrender and live in peace as Muslims or Christians, or resist and condemn yourself to death and slavery. The city's commander, Stachenberg, chose resistance. But those initial days of panic were done, and now the siege was grueling, bloody routine.
Come on.
The engineer George Rimpler had finished his earthworks. The city already had an old medieval wall studded with defensive towers, and earlier, the defenders had planted triangular fortress islands, revlins, into the dry moat that channeled attackers into overlapping fields of fire. Rimpler had augmented this by building an earthen rampart at the top of the slope leading
Right.
up to the steep moat, studding it with blockhouses and bunkers that had to be taken one by one. And in front of those fortifications, he built a spiked palisade. Now, enemies had to take multiple layers of defenses, and those tunneling toward the city would emerge in the moat with musket fire pouring down on them from front and behind. Rimpler had also
That's a
strengthened the Revlins with extra defenses, and dug trenches between all of the earthworks so defenders could reinforce positions under assault. The heaviest defenses, though, were in front of the palace. Rimpler knew that that's where the Ottomans would hit them. It was the longest stretch of wall without a tower, and it was flat and dry for easy digging. And Rimpler was right. The moment Kara Mustafa arrived, he set up his command tent directly across from the palace, while his troops surrounded the city. Charles of Lorraine across the river couldn't stop him. And within days, Mustafa was testing Rimpler's defenses. Trenches zigzagged forward towards the Habsburg capital. But despite Kara Mustafa's vast advantage in numbers, he had problems. The majority of his forces were levies, not professional soldiers. And sure, they're useful for surrounding a city, but not so great in an assault. The Tartar horsemen were barely under his control, and they scoured the countryside. Bad roads made him leave his heaviest cannons and mortars behind, and the gunpowder sent from the frontier territories was poor. In fact, when it rained, he couldn't fire his cannons, and it rained a lot. Through the first week of the siege, the Ottomans pushed forward toward the defenses inch by inch, digging trenches, gathering forces, and unleashing waves of janissaries on night raids to hit the palisade. In this battle between trench and blockhouse, with soldiers mere feet from each other, the primary weapon was not sword or musket, but instead the grenade. Squads lit these bombs from braziers and slowly marched, hurling handheld, faulty explosives at each other. Ottoman grenades were cased in glass and clay. They were lighter and killed by sheer explosive blast, but the Habsburg grenades were iron, and though heavy and short-ranged, caused hideous shrapnel wounds.
Ouch.
The toll was heavy, but Stauffenberg refused a truce to collect the fallen. So as they advanced, inch by inch, Ottoman soldiers had to
psychological
march
warfare.
past their dead comrades from previous attacks. And to top it all off, winter was coming. That's what had doomed Suleiman when he tried to take the city back in 1529,
snowstorm.
the bitter cold. The Grand Vizier swore
Not this
history
time.
would not repeat itself, because soon his mining tunnels would be ready. July 25th,
here
the
they come.
palisade. Night was falling on the defenses as Rimpler inspected his works. He was concerned. The day before, the Ottomans had detonated 2 mines at the end of the line, then tried to storm the broken palisade. Both assaults had failed, but they would only keep coming. And inside the city, Stauffenberg had citizens listening in their cellars. Rumors said Turks were infiltrating through the sewers. And during Mass that morning, a cannonball had smashed into St. Stephen's Cathedral and struck the organ. But here, on the line, things still looked pretty solid.
And
Then,
here we go.
the earth leapt upward. Rimpler saw sky and earth intermingle, and he
And-
crashed down the wrong way.
Ouch.
Stones rained down. He tried to wipe the dirt from his eyes and found his arm wouldn't respond. It was shot through with splinters from the shattered palisade. Screams rang out. Men scattered. Janissaries surged up the loose ramp of broken earth toward the gap in the defenses, swinging blades and hurling bombs. Garrison soldiers flooded the ruined gap, firing muskets and rolling grenades downhill. One of Rimpler's engineers grabbed him and dragged him backward over the splintered, studded earth to relative safety. The line was holding. That attack would set the pattern for the next week and a half. An Ottoman mine would explode, attackers would surge into the gap, and defenders would sally from their trenches and blockhouses to drive them back. The Ottomans advanced, but the earthworks were slowing them. His defenses were working. But Rimpler wouldn't live to see it. He died in one of the city's makeshift hospitals. The man who had done the most to defend Vienna would receive none of the credit. Yet by that time, Vienna's garrison were trying a new tactic: countermining. They dug their own tunnels, worming toward the Ottoman lines. Sometimes they sallied out into the enemy works, burning trench supports to destroy routes towards the city. And on occasion, they detonated a mine beneath Ottoman defenses, disintegrating the earthworks the enemies had raised to fire down on the defenders. Then, there was the most confused up-close fighting, when 2 teams of miners intercepted each other underground. Now, that was terrifying. Earth would crumble away, revealing an enemy so close you could see candlelight reflecting in his eyes. At such times, the tunnels descended into shuffling melee, with miners swinging pickaxes, then retreating before the ceilings collapsed in on friend and foe alike. And when they could, they sealed enemy tunnels with grenades or powder barrels. Meanwhile, inside the city, things were deteriorating. During the beginning of the siege, Viennese citizens slipped the lines to trade food with the Ottomans. But Stauffenberg stopped that, worrying that it was an avenue for spies. So apart from a few cattle raids by the university students, he effectively locked the citizens of Vienna inside.
University students get a pass.
Despite his leadership, the citizens began losing their grip as food ran low. They ate household pets, with some sardonic wit renaming cats roof rabbits. I'm with you, Zoe. That's messed up. Overcrowded and lacking sanitation, flux and dysentery chewed at the garrison. As August dragged into September, the Ottomans blew through the palisade and made a ramp up the first Revlin. And the apocalyptic panic from the earlier days of the siege returned. When the defenders took Ottoman prisoners, they decapitated and flayed them, sometimes alive, and hung their skins on the city wall. Then, on September 4th, the unthinkable happened. A roar from underground. 30 feet of medieval wall, right next to the bastion, bowed up, then collapsed.
Here they come again.
Through the gap, the shell-shocked defenders saw the Ottoman banners. Turkish batteries set up on the fallen defenses hammered the gap. Janissaries breached the wall. Musketeers sprinted in, trying to hold. They built a barricade of sandbags and cotton bales. Engineers, having anticipated a breach, rolled a spiked obstacle in front. And they had been lucky. The mine had detonated during a changing of the guard. Therefore, the previous shift and the fresh soldiers, both uninjured in the blast, loosed fire down the slope, shooting blind into gunpowder smoke. Ottoman troops, sensing an end to this hellish siege, sallied from tunnels and trenches to rush the gap. They focused fire on the defenders in the gap and nearby bastion, trying to keep their heads down as their comrades tried to break through. For 2 hours, the Ottomans pushed, and for 2 hours, the Viennese held. When the smoke cleared, 200 defenders were dead, and the breach littered with Ottoman casualties. Vienna still resisted, but it was clear that the city was days, if not hours, from falling. And 3 days later, a mine took down the other end of the wall. Another desperate defense. In the distance, they could see 5 more tunnels burrowing toward them. Kara Mustafa was preparing for a general assault, and Stauffenberg only had 4,000 men left. He began fortifying the city, ready to fight for Vienna, street by street. But while doing so, Stauffenberg was sending letters through the line, out to Lorraine and Leopold's court. They said a relief force was coming. They'd said it for weeks. So where the heck were they? And could they make it in time?
Let's hope so. Next up. Okay, so yeah, this is definitely getting desperate for Vienna. Sheesh, you'd think they would have gotten there earlier, but then again, politics. What are you gonna do? Anywho, bottom part coming up. Wing of Stars coming in. By the way,
each night for a week, a group of artillerymen climb the tower of St. Stephen's Cathedral. There, they fire rocket after rocket, signaling their dire situation to the relief army they hoped was coming. Each day brought them closer to starvation, and each night they fought desperate battles in the moat by light of tar flares. But this night, a sparking rocket answers in the hills. The cavalry has arrived. As the defenders of Vienna fought their desperate defense, Emperor Leopold struggled to cobble together enough allies to relieve the city. Because there was a problem with the Holy Roman Empire. See, it wasn't really an empire in the same way the Ottoman Empire was. Leopold couldn't just call up troops. Instead, he had to convince the imperial state that it was in their interest to help him. And that took money. And money was a problem. Because despite their opulence, the Habsburgs were chronically short on cash. To get King John Sobieski of Poland-Lithuania to maintain his treaty obligations, he had to agree to fund the Polish relief force during all its operations outside Poland. And therefore, he was basically tapped out. Luckily, Leopold had an ally, Pope Innocent IX, whose pet project was reconquering Catholic territory in Eastern Europe. That was his pet project? Really? I mean, some people crochet or bowl or... I don't, you know what? Who am I to judge?
Again,
the Pope poured vast amounts of money into Leopold's war chest, while spinning up a 17th century PR campaign to tout the relief of Vienna as a holy war. A decisive moment in the battle between Christianity and Islam. But not everyone was buying it. After all, Europe was fresh from the horrors of the 30 Years' War, where the Habsburgs had mercilessly slaughtered Protestants. And the biggest skeptic of this campaign was Louis XIV of France, who pointedly ignored the Pope's call to join his new Holy League. Because,
French always hates the
of course he did. The Habsburgs were Louis's main political rival. He was actually encroaching on their western border. So if they had to redirect troops to the east, good. With France opting out of the Holy League, Leopold turned to the states of the Holy Roman Empire, the ones that would be next if Vienna fell. Bavaria, Franconia, and even Protestant Saxony signed up. But coalition warfare is
they didn't want to take
complicated.
Over, no?
First, these armies need time to form. Second, they moved slow. It was mid-August by the time they marched. And by then, the commanders were riven over the questions that always crop up in coalition warfare. Who would lead? Leopold wanted to redeem himself after his embarrassing flight from Vienna, but everyone knew that was a bad idea. So Sobieski prevailed. Now, with that decided, who would use which road, cross which bridge, enter towns first to gain the honor of the populace, and when they finally met the Ottomans in battle, who would command the right flank? Because everyone knows that role was always given to the most important person. Oh, and cannons. They were dividing all those equally, right?
Probably not.
Every move was a conversation. Councils and protocol feasts dragged long. Things only began to shake out when Lorraine, who had just finished turning back an Ottoman reinforcement army, met up with the Holy League command. Likeable and suave, he proved the key ingredient in smoothing ruffled feathers and flattering big egos. He got everyone on the same page.
Nice.
Finally, there was a plan. September 12th, midnight. Inside Vienna, defenders could see bonfires in the woods. The relief army had arrived. And Kara Mustafa knew he'd been betrayed. Reports said Crimean Tartars that were to be his rearguard had not engaged the relief force. But even now, he stubbornly refused to give up Vienna. As he marshaled to meet the Holy League, he kept a large force of his best troops, his janissaries and elite cavalry, in front of the walls. After all, he thought, this Holy League was nothing to fear. His army was large and far better trained. He wouldn't be distracted from the real prize. He would attack the relief force and the city simultaneously.
So, two-pronged
the relief force outnumbered him, but he'd fortified a line of towns that forced the Holy League to attack over bad ground. The terrain favored his light horsemen. Then, at 4 a.m., he began harassing the far end of the Holy League's line. Arrows flew. Long-ranged janissary muskets coughed dirty smoke. Kara Mustafa had chosen his moment well. The enemy was still deploying, their troops not in position. And they took the bait. The Germans began moving down from the heights, firing back ragged volleys. Lorraine galloped forward, trying to call them back. The left wing of the Holy League's line had entered battle prematurely. And, to his shock, the center was following them. They couldn't move in a solid formation over the rough slope, instead breaking them into little knots of men. Things were in chaos. In the broken ground around the valley, cut by hills, ridges, and gullies, there was no way to keep command of an entire force. The farmlands that looked like neat fields on the map were in fact vineyards, their trellises providing obstacles that broke up the advance. All the while, Ottoman troops rained fire from each village. The Allied army moved forward in pieces, assaulting the strong points. Ottoman cavalry rushed the gaps in the ranks of the advancing infantry. Holy League artillery unlimbered and opened fire. Cohesion disappeared in both armies. Units fought not in coordination, but as individual companies. Cavalry...
Well, just like I seen in the Bismarck video, plans never survive that first contact with the enemy. And yep, it's definitely happening here. Young saw their chance to be like, hey, oh, come get us, la la la. And they just descend into chaos. This is gonna be tricky to figure out. Anyway.
Intermixed with infantry. Dirty smoke blanketed the battlefield, hiding both friend and foe. Fortress towns changed hands in attack and counterattack. Lorraine galloped the line, yelling at the men to close up, trying to keep some semblance of order and seal gaps. The day was sweltering, the hottest anyone could remember. Weapons became hot to the touch, and hours of firing left men's faces blackened from gunpowder. Sweat drew clear channels through the grime. By noon, the Holy League had captured 2 major towns, and began to press forward toward a high bluff where the banner of the Prophet, the symbol of the Ottoman headquarters, flew. But where were the Poles? Sobieski's cavalry force had been the last to arrive in the heights of the previous night, making camp in darkness, and had yet to join the battle. In the early afternoon, Holy League infantrymen looked to their right and saw enormous plumes of dust rising above the ridge. The Polish cavalry was making its way, slowly, down to the flat ground where they could let loose. While at Vienna, men defended the wooden palisades they'd erected to cover the gaps in the wall. Ottoman attackers had tried to spring several mines, but desperate sallying parties swamped and defused them at the last minute. Yikes. Vienna was holding, but only barely. Outside, the armies started to tire. But the League troops were fresh, while the Ottomans were demoralized, having spent 2 months in the meat grinder of siege warfare and camp diseases. Some of the levies were starting to desert. And then, the Polish heavy cavalry exited the forest. The League's infantry greeted them with cheers. The winged hussars had finally arrived, ready to smash directly into the enemy camp. But it takes a great deal of time to draw up thousands of cavalry. Lances, horses, and men in plate armor are no good unless they move forward in a block. Sobieski wanted to gauge their effectiveness, so he picked 120 men to charge immediately as a vanguard. Not many would come back, but it could hit the Ottomans before they could mass forces to counter this new threat. The contingent powered forward, wooden wings on the back of their horses clattering, frightening the enemy mounts. And at the last moment, their lances dipped. And they plowed into the Ottoman line, carving a hole in their ranks. Dropping their shattered lances, they laid in with long swords and pistols. On the high ground, Kara Mustafa saw the hussars strike deep into his ranks. It was over. Once a larger cavalry formed, they could strike into his camp, cut him off from both Vienna and his retreat into Hungary. So, he retired, escaping with the banner of the Prophet and his personal treasury, while dispatching messages for men in the trenches to abandon their positions. He did not want to witness what would come next. The Holy League generals conferred. The infantry had won the day. The only question now was whether to finish the Ottomans or wait until morning. They decided to finish them, and Sobieski would land the killing blow. The king led the vanguard personally. 3,000 winged hussars charged down from the heights, with 15,000 lighter Polish and German cavalry behind. The largest cavalry charge in history seemed to turn the valley black. The lancers crashed into the rapidly dissolving Turkish defense, then carried on with their 4-foot swords. Those behind swung axes and maces, catching anyone unlucky enough to try and cover the army's retreat. This wasn't so much of a fight as it was a rout. The Polish and German cavalry swept through the fleeing Ottomans, plunging into their abandoned camp. And there, they reined in, gorging themselves on the greatest spoils of the campaign. They looted diamonds and gold, and set barrels of gunpowder alight for the sheer elation of watching them explode. They would loot the Turkish camp for a week. Meanwhile, the German units reached the Ottoman trench works, clearing them and taking the remaining Ottoman engineers prisoner. Not quite the same as finding diamonds for a week, but whatever. Vienna had been relieved, and a new alliance formed. Over the next 16 years, this Holy League would strike deep into Eastern Europe, bringing Hungary and part of the Balkans back into the Habsburg sphere. And though no one knew it at the time, the Battle of Vienna would mark the turning point in the Ottoman expansion into Europe, paving the way for the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And Kara Mustafa, for his part, was executed for his failure. The Habsburgs and Ottomans continued to fight for centuries, each kingdom mirroring the other's decline. And in a final act of irony, which is a story for another time, they would in fact die together, fighting on the same side.
World War I.
Their interests linked by the same geography they'd created in a war so long ago. A long ago battle, the Siege of Vienna. Thank you so much for—
Pretty much. Also, just checking that little Mustafa thing. The loss of only territory to the Holy League. Yeah, that makes sense. And you don't get in trouble for that. Hence why he was so, worried about going back. So, there you go. The Siege of Vienna. Let me know what you guys think of the complete series. Let me know what you do more. Sorry. Sneezed. Adios.